What's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to walk you through building out your first React application. And what we're going to build is a very simple website with a mobile responsive navbar. And I really wanted to focus on the mobile responsive navbar because one, it's just something that everyone needs to be able to do. And I think this simple project is going to allow us to focus on some of the core concepts of React. We'll get a chance to play around with a couple different components within the website. However, we won't have too many so that it becomes too complicated. We're just going to have two, maybe three. Building a mobile responsive navbar, all websites are going to have it. So I thought it would be a great, fun little project for anyone who's just getting started with React. So anyways, that's enough talking. Let's go and take a look at what we're going to build. So this is the website that we're going to build. It's a fairly simple website, but I think it still looks pretty nice. And if we take a look at, what are the different things that we've got going on this website, you can see at the top, we've got our navbar, and on the left side, we've got our logo. And then on the right side, we've got our different links. Then we've got this nice, beautiful backdrop of mountains with this slight blue color that's kind of resting on top of the image. And then I've got this text right here with a couple of buttons just to make it look like an actual website, even though the focus of this project was really to focus on the mobile responsive navbar. And if we take a look at this, if I start shrinking the screen size, you'll see that once we get to mobile size, and I guess even before we get there, you can see that the links are a little bit cramped up, but that really wasn't the focus of this project. I just wanted to show you guys how we can kind of switch between that mobile view versus a full desktop view. So if I keep going down a little bit further, you're going to see that now we're in the mobile view. We've lost our links, but we've got the hamburger menu. And if we click on this hamburger menu, you're going to see that our nav links pop up from the side. So we've got that nice sliding effect. And then if we close this out, you'll see that it goes away. So very simple project, but keeping track of whether the nav links are open or not, we'll get a chance to play around with the useState hook within React. So you get a chance to learn about state management within React while still building a real world type application. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. So let's get started on coding this out. To get things started, let's go ahead and create our React app. And so there's two different ways we can do that. We can either do npx and then create React app, followed by the name of our app, which we can call mountains. However, if you have the create React app application installed globally, then we can do create React app and then mountains. So either way works. And once that's completed, we can navigate into the mountains directory and just do a code dot, and that'll open up in VS Code. And whenever you use the create React app tool, it's going to come with a pre-configured application. And what we're going to do is we're just going to delete that and create everything from scratch. And so under our source directory, we'll create a new file and we'll call this index.js. And within our index.js, there's going to be two main packages that we have to import. So we'll import React, and that's going to come from React. And we also need to import React DOM as well. And then we're going to create our main component that's going to encompass our application. We'll call it app. And so we'll do const app. And it's going to be a functional component. And for now, we're just going to return a div. And we'll just say app. Then we have to render this out into our index.html file. So if we go into our public directory, and if we go into our index.html, all of our React applications, we want to mount it on this div right here with an ID of root. And that's fairly simple to do. So we can just call React DOM.render. And then we have to pass in the app or the component that we want to render. And that's going to be our app component. And then just basically tell it where we want to render it. So we'll do a document.get element by ID. And we want to get the root element. So that's going to match this div right here. And once that's done, let's just do a save all. And I'm going to open up my terminal and do an npm start just to make sure that everything looks okay so far. And if you get this warning, that just means that there's already another application using port 3000. Just so hit yes, and it's just going to look for the next available port. All right, and it may be a little small for you guys, but you can see here that we rendered out app. So that means so far everything looks good with our React application. And moving forward, what I'm going to do is the tab on the left, this is going to be the project that we're working on actively, and then the tab on the right is going to be the completed project. Looking at the completed application, let's try to figure out what components we're going to build out or see how we're going to break this website down into different components. And, this project is meant to be very simple. This is really meant to be one of your first React projects. So this is just a nice, gentle intro into React. So I wanted to keep things very simple. And so we're going to have just two components. Well, three if you include the app component. But the two other components that I'm talking about are going to be the navbar. So that's going to be represented in a component called navbar. And then we'll have another component for this text right here with these two buttons. And we'll call this component showcase. I couldn't think of a better name, but I think that fits the description decently. And what I'm going to do is I want to create a separate folder for all of our components. So under the source directory, I'm going to do a new folder. I'm going to call this components. And here we're going to store the navbar component as well as the showcase component. And we're going to do a new file. And we'll call this navbar. And I'm going to do .jsx. The reason I'm doing .jsx is that when you use the .jsx extension, VS Code is going to give us a lot of auto completion and a few other features. However, if you want to do a .js, it's the same thing. So the functionality is not going to be different. Either one will work, but I just like doing .jsx because then I get access to a lot of the shortcuts that come with VS Code. And, like any other component, we're going to have to import React. And for now, let's just create a simple functional component that's just going to render out some text. And don't forget to export the navbar. Once we've got that exported, let's go back to our index.js and let's import it into this file. All right, and once we've got that imported, I'm just going to render that out right below the word app. Let's do a save all and let's see if everything looks good so far. Okay, so we've got app and we've got navbar. Okay, so we've got our navbar wired up. Let's start laying out the HTML for our application and more specifically for our navbar. Now within our app component, I'm going to actually remove this text right here. And underneath the navbar, so the navbar is going to be at the top of the web page. So we'll have a navbar div or component, and then we'll have another div called main that's going to wrap the rest of our application. So under our navbar, I'm going to create a new div. And I'm going to give this a class of main. And this is where our showcase component is going to reside, but we're going to build that out after we finish the navbar. All right, and the next thing I want to do is let's create our CSS file. So I'm going to do a new file in our source directory. I'm just going to call this app.css. And we're going to have some standard configs in our CSS. So I'm going to zero out the margin and padding and set the box sizing to border box. And then lastly on the body, I'm going to set the font family. I'm going to use Arial, Helvetica, and then sans serif. And one last thing I want to do is under the anchor tags that we're going to have, I just want to remove the text decoration. I hate looking at those things. Okay, so we've got our basic CSS configured, and now we need to wire it up into our application. And that's fairly easy to do. We just do an import and then just provide the path to that file. So that's just going to be app.css. All right, we'll hit save. And there we go. So we saw it update. We can see that we're using a different font. So everything looks good so far. Now, before we proceed any further, we are going to make use of Font Awesome icons. So we actually are going to use it in two different places. So it's going to provide us the hamburger menu, as well as if we take a look at the navbar component, this mountain icon. So that's going to come from the Font Awesome library. So let's wire up the Font Awesome library. And to do that, go to cdnjs.com and just search for Font Awesome. And it should be the first result that you get. So we'll just copy that. And we want to go into our index.html. And under the last link tag, we're just going to type in link, and then we want CSS. And then all we have to do is just update the href. Okay, so that's all we should have to do to wire up our Font Awesome icons. Now let's figure out how we're going to structure the HTML for our navbar. So if we go to the completed application, we can see that I think it makes sense to break this down into two main divs within the navbar component. We're going to have the logo div. So this is going to contain the Font Awesome icon as well as the text for mountains. So this represents the website's logo. And then we're going to have a div that's going to contain all of the navbar links. So let's go to our navbar component. And we're going to remove what we have so far. And sticking to, basic HTML semantics, let's use the nav tags. And within here, we're going to have two divs. So the first div is going to have a class of logo. And within here, we're going to have a Font Awesome icon. And beneath that, we'll have an H4 tag that's just going to say mountains. Then beneath this div, we'll have a UL. So this is going to contain all of our different links. And the UL is going to have a couple classes. And for now, we're just going to start off by giving it a class of navlinks. You'll see that, later on, we're going to add another class, but that's going to be a little bit more dynamic, and we need to render that out through JavaScript. So for now, we'll just keep it as navlinks. And we're going to have, I think it's going to be 4 LIs. So 1 LI, and then within there, we're going to have an anchor tag. These aren't going to actually do anything. So we're just going to put the hash symbol in the href. And this one's going to say home. And let's copy this a few times and just update the text. So the second one is going to be the about page. The third one can be the services page. And the last one's going to be the contact us page. Now, each one of these li tags is also going to have a class, and it's going to have a class of link. And if we take a look at our application, you can see that we've got the icon, we've got the second half of the logo, which is the word mountains, and then we've got our links. So now let's get this to look, similar to what we have in the final app. So we're going to have to do a couple of different things. First of all, we want this to go horizontally instead of vertically. So the easiest way to do that is by using Flexbox. So the div that contains the logo is going to be the first flex item, and then the UL is going to be the second flex item. So this is going to put them all into one horizontal row. And so if we go back to our app.css, under nav, since we just got one nav component, we're just going to do a display of flex. And so now you can see we've got them side by side. However, I don't want them all cramped up against one another. So what we're going to do is we're going to do justify content and then space around. So the default is actually start, I believe. Start, which means that it goes to the front, all the way to the front of that row, which we don't want. So space around is going to space them out the way we want them to. And so now that looks a little bit closer to what we want, right? So we've got them like that. However, now we need to get the nav links to spread out horizontally as well. And that's actually easy to do. We can do the same exact thing. All we have to do is we have to go under the UL and make that a display of flex as well. So if we go to nav links, which is the class on the UL tags, we can do a display of flex as well. Yep. And now if we take a look, we can see that it's also lined horizontally. However, they're cramped up against one another. And I don't like having the little decoration. So we'll fix that as well. So under nav links, we can do, I believe it's going to be list-style none. So that should get rid of this stupid dot. Yep, there we go. And I don't like the fact that they're also cramped up against one another. So we can do a space around as well on the justify content property. And now if we take a look at this, you'll see that nothing's changed. And I'm going to show you guys exactly why that is. So even though we put the justify content property, if we go down to that div real quick, we'll see something interesting. So take a look at our nav links, right? You can see that the nav links element, or that UL element, is using the minimum width possible. So even if we do space around, right, there's no other space for that element. So what we want to do is we want to give this UL a little bit more width. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width to 50%, just to give it a little more space. So now we can see that they're spread out nicely. Then the next thing we need to tackle is, notice how the logo is vertically aligned. So we want them to be lined up side by side. So once again, we're going to use our good friend Flexbox to do that. And so if we access the logo class, which if we go back to our navbar component, right, we gave that div a class of logo. We're going to set the display property to flex. And so now we can see it's lined up horizontally. All right, so we've got the basic structure of our navbar. Now let's style it up a little bit more to make it look a little bit more appealing and get it to look like this. And under the nav, I want to give it a little bit of height. So we'll say min-height. All right, I'm going to give it 8 viewport heights. So it's essentially like 8% of our vertical real estate. And I also want to position it absolute. But actually, we'll hold off on doing that for now. I'll explain why I want to make that an absolutely positioned element. Before we actually continue finishing up the rest of our navbar, I want to wire up that image right here. So if you go to the GitHub repository in the description, you'll see that the image is in there. So you can just grab the image from there, or feel free to go online and just pick any image. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't even have to be mountains related. I'm going to take this image and I'm just going to drag it into our source directory. And I'm going to rename this guy. So I'm just going to call this background-image.jpg. If we go to our index.js, you can see that The rest of our website is going to be wrapped inside this div with the class of main. So I'm going to set the background image on this div right here with the class of main. We can access the URL property and pass in background image.jpg. Okay, so let's take a look at that. And it looks like it didn't work. Let's take a look at why. Yep, so right now our main div, since it has no content, it has no actual height, so we can't actually see the background. So I'm going to just give it a height of 100 viewports. So that's going to be the entire vertical height of our screen. So now we should be able to see our image. Great. The only problem is that it's not kind of centered and aligned the way I wanted to. We're just getting a small portion of the image, so we can't even see the mountains. And that's an easy fix. So we can go under background dash size, set to center, and background dash position, center as well. And so now we've got our mountain. However, you'll notice that if you take a look at our website, there's this nice blue hue to the overall image. And so that's actually a gradient that's running on top of our image, which is what gives it that nice shade of blue. And that's actually easy to do. So what we can do is we can just pass in a gradient to the background property. And that's essentially going to allow us to basically stack two different backgrounds together to give us that nice blended image. So I'm going to do a radial gradient. Start at the center and then center. Then let's give it the two colors it's going to go from. So this is going to be 2D7E9270. That's going to be at 0%. That's going to go to 1C406, 17C, going to go to 100%. And don't forget the comma after that. All right, and let's take a look. And so now we get that nice shade of blue. And so even though our background image takes up 100%, you'll see that the nav bar takes up 8 viewport height. So right now you can see that we can scroll, and I don't want it to behave like that. Instead, I want the nav bar to kind of rest on top of our background image. And the way to do that is to position it absolutely, so it takes it out of the document flow. And our div with the class of main is basically unaware of the nav bar existing. So the nav bar is just going to be sitting on top of the image. And so if we go back to our nav, we can do a position absolute. And we don't need to actually position it using like the top or left, because it's going to already be lined up exactly where we want it to. And you'll see that as soon as we do that, it's going to mess up the layout and the structuring that we had set up with our Flexbox. And the reason for that is that it actually kills all of the width we had originally given it to. So before, it had full 100% width of our screen. But now if you go to our nav, right, you can see that's all the width it has. So let's give it a width of 100%. And that should get it back to exactly the way we had it before. And also take a look at where the logo and the links are spaced out from a vertical perspective within the nav bar element, or the nav element, right? So they're all hugging the top of it. And that's not what I want. Instead, we want it to be right in the middle. So this is going to be a Flexbox property. And so we can do align dash items, and this is going to be a center. And that's going to put it right at the middle. So take a look. Remember, it's hugging the top. As soon as we hit save, right now it's in the middle. If we change this to an end, right? Then we're going to see it hug the bottom of it. So now it's at the bottom of our nav element. That's just going to align it vertically when our flex direction is set to row. But we want middle, or I think was it center? Yep. All right, so let's finish up styling the rest of the links as well as our logo. And the first thing I'm going to do is under the logo class, I'm going to give this a color. So this is essentially just going to be all white, except we're going to make it just a little bit transparent by passing in that, opacity property. And so now we've got it colored kind of exactly how we want it to. The only other thing is I want to make this a little bit bigger. So we'll do font dash size and we'll set this to 32 pixels. Right, so that's looking good. However, I do want a little bit of space between these two. So under our logo, I'm going to grab the H4 tag, which is the element that contains the word mountains. Right, so this is going to grab the H4 tag within the div with the class of logo. I'm going to give this a little bit of margin left. And I think 7 pixels should be good. Let's set the letter spacing to 1 pixel and the font weight to lighter. Okay, and taking a look at that, it looks like it's pretty much all we need to do for the logo. And now let's move on to styling the nav links. And so first thing first, we're going to set the font size to 24 pixels. And that should be all we have to do for the nav links, actually. The next thing we need to target is the individual links. And I'm just going to give this a letter spacing of 3 pixels. And set the font weight to bold. Right, then let's grab the anchor tags within the links. And I'm just going to set the color on those guys. So they're also going to be set to white with a little bit of transparentness. So exactly what we did for the logo. Okay, so that's looking good. And there's one last little subtle effect with the links that I didn't mention, is that when you hover it, you can see that the links get a little bit brighter. So I changed the color so that there's no longer any transparentness when we do a hover effect. So if we go under link, and then when we hover over the anchor tag, all we have to do is just change the color to RGBA. And that's going to be set to 255, 255, 255, and then a 1. So it's not transparent at all. So now we should have the same hover effect. Okay, so we've got the basics of our nav bar done. Now let's work on making this nav bar mobile responsive. And the first thing that we're going to need to do is, first of all, let's take a look at the completed app. So you can see as we get smaller and smaller, you'll see that these guys kind of get a little squished, which I know isn't pretty, but that wasn't really the focus of this project. I really wanted to show you just how to get that mobile responsive nav bar. So this is what it looks like on mobile, and you'll see that we've got the hamburger drop-down menu. Well, it's not a drop-down menu, but when we click it, you'll see we get this slide-out navigation bar where we got our links. And then if we click that again, it's going to close it. So let's add this icon, which is going to be the hamburger icon, which comes from the Font Awesome library. And that's going to go in our navbar component. So under the UL element, we want to create another div. And this is going to have a class of hamburger toggle. And the icon should be and then give it a class of FAS, FA-bars, and FA-LG. Let's hit save and let's take a look at that. Is bigger again. So you can see we've got the hamburger icon sitting right there. So let's style this up a little bit first, but because when we're in, a wide screen or, regular, either a tablet or a PC, we shouldn't see this icon. So let's style it first and then we'll set the display to none so that we can't see it when we're in full screen. And so back to our CSS, we're going to set the hamburger toggle. First of all, we want the cursor to be a pointer because right now, if we hover over it, right, it doesn't give us a little pointy finger, but we can still click it. So when we do cursor pointer, save that, we can now get the finger. And then the only other thing that we got to do is set the color to white. All right, so that's what we want. All right, so I think we've got the basics of our website done. Now the fun part starts. So now we get to actually work on making a mobile responsive navbar. And so the first thing that we have to do is, first of all, when we're in full screen, we want to make sure that this hamburger icon does not show. And that's pretty easy to do. All we have to do is just set this to a display of none. Okay, and so now that's gone. And let's set up a media query. So I'm just going to put this at the bottom. And we'll just do at media screen and basically max width. So where do we want the breakpoint um, for our nav bar? So I mean, we could just play around with it and just take a look at what value you think would be good. So as I make this smaller, notice the width of the screen right up there. So we can pick whatever breakpoint that we want. So I'm just going to grab, I don't know, what do you guys think? 900? We can grab 850. I know it's kind of squished right there, but I think 850 is good for now. And so what do we want to do when we get to that smaller screen size? Well, first of all, we want to toggle our hamburger menu or make it visible. So if we go under dot hamburger dash toggle, we want to set the display to block. And so that way we can actually see it. So let's take a look. We get down to, well, we're down to 850, still don't see it. Okay, there we go. So we can see that now once we get down to a low enough number, we should see the hamburger icon. And I think it just went away again. Where'd it go? There you go. So there's our hamburger icon right there. Now we've got that popping up. However, we still have an issue. We need to get rid of these nav links, right? So these nav links, if we take a look at the completed app, right? If we click on this, you'll see that it comes out from the right side. So what we want to do is we want to position this absolutely so that it's all the way to the right off of the screen so that you can't actually see it. And we need to take the .nav links and we're going to set the position to absolute. Okay, and so now they're gone, right? We don't see them. Oh, I was on the completed app. So we take this. And so now they get positioned absolutely right there. And we want to set this to the right 0 pixels. So now they are off this. Well, they should be off the screen. Well, one more thing actually. And we want these to be lined up vertically. So let's set the display to flex. And let's set the flex direction to column. All right, so that'll make all the links line up vertically. And so we can see them lining up vertically. However, if we take a look at the completed app, we want the navbar to take up basically all of the height except for the space this navbar is taking, which is 8 viewport heights. So we want this to take up 92 viewport heights. So let's set the height. That's going to be 92 viewport heights. And so now we can see they're taking up 92 viewport heights. And let's do an align items center. So this is going to center all of them horizontally. And we want the width to be 100%, right? They should take up the whole screen. And we want the top of all of the links to start at 8 viewport heights, right? Because we don't want it to overlap with the top nav bar. We'll do top 8 viewport heights. And that's exactly what I want. So hopefully this made sense, guys. So this nav bar right up here takes up 8 viewport heights, and we want all of the links to take up 92 viewport heights. So we set the height to 92 viewport heights, and we set the position of it absolutely so that we can say that I want it to start from a vertical perspective at 8 viewport heights, which is right where this nav bar ends. And I want it to go all the way down to the bottom. So that's why we gave it a height of 92 viewport heights. And this is going to have a background color of teal and a font size of 32 pixels. So we want them to be a little bit bigger. Yep, and that is perfect. So as we get smaller, we can see we get the hamburger icon and the window pops up exactly how we want. In the completed app, if we take a look at how the navbar actually functions, we can see that it's off to the side where we can't see it. And when we click on this button, it pops up. So what we want to do is we want to translate this 100% so that we can't see it and it's off of the screen. If we do a transform and then translate X, just set this to 100%, it's going to move this off of the screen so that we can no longer see it. And that should be the starting position of our app, right? So now it's gone. However, if you take a look, we've got the scroll wheel and we can see that it's positioned all the way at the edge of the site. But we don't actually want to see this scroll bar. So we want to go under body and set the overflow in the X direction to hidden. Yep. And so now it's completely gone. And basically, whenever a user clicks on this, all we need to do is just translate it, the navigation links 100% back in the opposite direction. And we're going to do that by adding a specific class to the nav links, and we'll call that class active. So whenever this class gets added to the nav links, we're going to transform, and we're going to translate this and then 0%. So that's going to move it back to the original position. Okay. So now we go into inspect. And we find our nav links. So under nav links, let's add a class of active. And you'll see what happens. So hit active. And so now it pops up. If we remove active, it should go away. Okay. And the only other thing I want to do is I want to add a transition so that it slides in instead of just popping it up right in front of your face. So we can do a transition, and we want to transition just transform. We're going to do a 0.5 second transition with an ease in. So now we click on this, put in the active class. We get the nice sliding effect. And we can remove it and it slides out. So now we have to figure out how we can actually add that class whenever a user clicks on the hamburger icon. So let's go back to our navbar. So now we're going to get a chance to play around with some JavaScript and some state management within React. So what we need is a simple Boolean in JavaScript to basically keep track of whether the nav links are open. So a simple Boolean should do, we shouldn't really need anything else for state. And when you're working with state in React, we need to use the useState hook. So let's import that from the React library. We want useState. And I'm going to type out exactly what we need. So I'm going to do const, and we're going to do a little destructuring. Actually, I think it may be easier to explain it by doing like this. So we'll do useState, and we want to pass in what the default value is. So by default, since we're going to have a Boolean that represents whether the nav links are open, when we move into a mobile view, we want the nav links by default to be closed, right? And they should only pop up when the user clicks it. They shouldn't just be open by default. So we'll set this to false by default. And we want to set this equal to, and we'll do a const, and we're going to do the destructuring. So hopefully you guys are familiar with destructuring. If not, I'll explain in a second. And we have to pass in two variables. So the first variable is going to represent the Boolean that's going to keep track of whether the nav links are open or not. I'm going to call this nav link open. Then the second variable is going to store a function that we use to actually change the state. So when the user clicks on the hamburger menu, it's going to handle the logic for flipping nav link open from false to true and true to false. So I like to just call this, we'll call this nav link toggle. So it's going to toggle the state. Well, actually, yeah, I think that's fine. Nav link toggle. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with destructuring, let me explain to you what is exactly happening here. This is kind of an important topic, not just for JavaScript, but for React in general, because you'll be doing a lot of destructuring. But basically, this useState hook right here is going to return an array. So we have an array, basically, and we could technically write this out in a more understandable way. So we could say const, and then we can call this state, which is an array. And we can say that it's equal to useState false. And I'm going to comment that out for now. But basically, useState is going to return an array that I'm storing into a variable called state. And then I want to grab these two properties. So the variable that's going to actually store the state, and then the function that's used to update it. And so that's the equivalent of just doing this. We're basically taking const nav link open, and we're setting that equal to state, and we're grabbing the first element. That's all it's doing. And then the second one is going to be const and then nav link toggle, and that's going to be set to state, but the second element. So that's all destructuring does, is that it grabs the elements of an array and it destructures them out into these two variables. So this line right here is doing the same exact thing as these three lines right here. So now that we have our state, let's set up an on-click event handler on the hamburger toggle. So when the user clicks on it, we want to perform certain actions. And I'm going to call a function called handle nav links toggle, and we need to define that function. We'll do const handle nav links toggle. And all this is going to do is we want to grab this function, which we need to use whenever we want to change the value of nav link open. And we need to pass in what the new value for nav link open should be. So all we need to do is just set it to the opposite of what nav link is at the moment. Okay, so if it starts out as false, whenever the user clicks on our hamburger icon, it's going to trigger this function, who's just going to say that I want you to set the value of nav link open to be the opposite of what it is right now. So if it's false, it's going to turn to true. And if it's true, it's going to turn to false. So let's see if that works so far. And I actually want to bring up the console again. And I actually want to open up our components tab. So the components tab you'll only have available if you have the React developer tools. So I highly recommend you install it. It's just a Chrome extension. Search for React Dev Tools, and you'll find it. There's only one. But it's going to allow us to actually take a look at what the state is at any moment in time. So right now, if we go to, I'm going to have to shrink it so I can get the the navbar. I'll go to navbar, and you'll see that right now the state is false. So navlink open is set to false because the links aren't open. However, when I click on this, notice how it changed to true, because when we clicked on this, it triggered this function who then, flipped the state. And then if I click on this, it's going to get set to false. So we've got our state implemented properly. However, we don't actually see the links, right? When we click on this, nothing happens. So we're changing state, except we're not actually opening up the links. And that's because, remember, the links, we need to add that specific active class to our nav links to see them, because that's going to translate them over 100% back to the original starting position. So under nav links right here, what we want to do is when navlink open is set to true, we want to add the active class, right? So if I hit save right now, it's always going to be open, regardless of whether the state changes or not. I remove this, it's always going to be closed, no matter what happens to the state. So we need to find a way to dynamically render out the active class only when navlink open is set to true. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a new function, and I'm going to call this const render classes. It's going to be another plain old arrow function. And whether the nav links are open or not, we're always going to have a class of nav links. So I'm going to define a variable, and I'll call this, it's going to have to be a let because we're going to change it. This is going to be called classes. So this is going to store all of the classes that are going to be assigned to nav links. I'm going to set this equal to just nav links at first. Right? Because we're always going to need that one class no matter what. Then we're going to have a simple conditional property, and we'll say if nav link is open, then I want to take classes and I want to add the class active. So then I'm going to have nav links and active. But that's only going to happen if the nav link is open. If it's not, then we're going to just skip over this if statement, and we want to return classes. So this variable right here is going to store all of the classes that are going to get assigned to nav links. And here, I'm going to change this. We're going to pass in that function. So what did I call it? Render classes. Okay, let's save that. And now let's take a look. This is the moment of truth. If I click on this, boom, look at that. If I click on that again, it closes. And if we go back out, we've got our normal navigation. And if we go down to our mobile, you can see that now we've got this. So that's all we had to do to make a mobile responsive navbar. And I think that's the bulk of this project. That's really what I wanted to show you guys in this project, is just how to use state to represent, when the nav links are open or not within React, and how to set up a mobile responsive navbar. But just to finish this application, I wanted to make it look like an actual website instead of just having a navbar just sitting there by itself. If we go to the final app, we still have that one last component that we need to build out, which is this component right here, the showcase component. So if you guys tuned into this video just to see the mobile navbar aspect, feel free to, watch another video, or feel free to close out this YouTube video. But if you guys want to follow along, I'm about to wrap this up by completing the showcase. It shouldn't take too long. There's just a little bit of styling and some HTML that we need to add. So let's create our showcase component. And we'll import the React library. And once again, this is going to be a functional component. And we'll export that. And let's wire it up into our index.js, or our app component. And I'm going to let VS Code import the component for me. So if I click on this, you'll see that it added the showcase component. So make sure that you manually do that if you don't have VS Code do it for you. And it looks like I got an error. Yeah, but I forgot to hit save all. Okay, so we've got our showcase component. And let's go back to our showcase component and let's start laying out the HTML for it. First of all, for these main divs, let's give it a class of showcase. And we're going to have an H2 tag. And this is going to be the text that says discover an adventure. Then we're going to have an H1 tag and then a P tag with some random text and then 2 buttons. And these 2 buttons will also be wrapped in a parent div as well. So this H2, this is going to say, discover an adventure. And the H1 is going to say travel the world. And for the P tag, I'm just going to copy and paste some text in. Just if you want, you could even just type in like something like lorem. I think I did like 15 characters and then hit tab, and then that's going to get you some random text as well. And then beneath these, this P tag, we'll add another div. And we'll give this a class name of showcase __ buttons. And there's going to be 2 buttons here. The first one is going to have a class of showcase __ btn -services. And this is going to say services. And the next button, this is going to have a class of showcase __ btn -about. And this is going to say about us. All right, and so that's all we need to do for the showcase component. The rest is pretty much just CSS. But let's go back to our page and let's just see what that looks like. Yep, so everything's just kind of crammed right up there. And so we'll target the showcase class. And I'm just going to give this a max width of, 800 pixels. We'll set the display to flex. And this is what I'm going to do. So this is a little bit of a nice trick whenever you want to center an item on your screen. So we have, you can see that this component right here is centered directly in the middle, vertically in our screen, as well as horizontally. And so the way to do that is we basically take the div that wraps all of this, and we give it a height of 100% or 100 viewport height. So actually, I could just show you inside the developer console. So we go to showcase. Let me make this a little smaller. Notice how it's taking its 100% viewport height. So it covers the whole screen from a vertical perspective. And then what we do is we set the display to flex and the direction to column. And then we set the justify content to center, and that's going to put it right at the center. So let's set height to 100 viewport heights. And then we want display to be flex and justify content. Remember, this is going to put this right in the middle from a vertical perspective. And then to center it horizontally, we want to do an align items center as well. If we take a look at this, it's not going to actually look like the way we want it to. So everything is shifted. Well, first of all, I didn't set my direction either, so that's probably why. So we'll do flex direction to column. But now it should be lined up vertically. However, it's off to the side. And that's because the parent div, the showcase div, is lined up all the way right here. So we need to center that div as well. And that's pretty easy to do. We can just set a margin to 0 and then auto. So when you set the horizontal aspect of it to an auto, it's going to center it. And so now it's in the middle. The next thing I want to do is I want to grab the H1 tag within the showcase div. and style that up a bit. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, 64 pixels to be exact. Set the color to white. And then we'll set the font weight. We'll just leave it as normal. And let's give it some letter spacing. So 3 pixels. And let's dial the H2 now. So we'll give this a font size of 28. It's going to be a little bit smaller. The color is going to be white as well. And the font weight is going to be set to lighter. And the letter spacing is going to be 4 pixels. Let's take a look at that. All right, so it's starting to look pretty similar. We just got to style the P tag and the buttons. Paragraph, I'm going to set the color to white. And we're going to center this one. And we want to set the font size to 16 pixels. And let's give it some margin. Just so it's not hugging the H1 tag. And then we'll also give it some margin at the bottom so that the buttons aren't right up against it. And so, yeah, we can see that the 10 pixels of margin at the top and then the 50 pixels of margin at the bottom. Okay, to style the buttons now, we'll do showcase __ btn-services. Let's give this a border. It's going to have a white border. It's going to be solid and 1 pixel. And we're going to set the background color to be transparent. And the color is going to be white. And let's take a look at that. Okay, and so let's just give it some padding to make it a little bigger. We're going to have 10 pixels vertically and 50 pixels horizontally. Okay, that looks good. And we're going to also have to give it some margin. So 10 pixels horizontally should space out the buttons nicely. Okay, we've got some space, and then once we style this one, he'll also get another 10 pixels in margin as well. So then we got showcase __ btn-about. We're going to give this the same border. We're going to set the background color to white on this one. And let's give the text some color. So that's going to be RGB 26, 108, and then 122. And then same padding, so 10 pixels and 50 pixels. And then some margin as well in the horizontal direction. And I think that should be it, guys. So let's take a look at the final thing. And there you go. We take a look at the difference. Hopefully it's the same. Yep, it's exactly the same. So there you go, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this project. I don't know if this was your first React app, but if it is, congratulations. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and or subscribe to my channel.